Undercover CEO tries to get a job at his own company, gets rejected for a shocking reason. What happens when the person you're interviewing is secretly the CEO of your company? And what if you rejected him for all the wrong reasons? This is the story of how one man's undercover mission exposed a hidden truth and changed everything. Thomas Grayson wasn't your typical CEO. He wasn't flashy, he didn't like the spotlight, and despite running a billion-dollar company, he still remembered what it felt like to clock in as a junior staffer, scrambling to make ends meet. That's why, after overhearing rumors about poor treatment during the hiring process at one of his company's regional branches, he knew he couldn't just sit in his corner office and read reports. He needed to see it for himself. Thomas devised a plan. He created a new identity, Tom Gray, an average middle-aged man with a modest resume, a short employment gap, and just enough experience to qualify for an entry-level warehouse assistant position. He trimmed his hair, wore secondhand clothes, and even used an old flip phone instead of his usual smartphone. He applied online through the company's regular portal and waited. Within a week, he got an invitation for an interview at the Northbridge branch, one of the busiest and supposedly most problematic locations. Tom arrived at the branch 10 minutes early. The receptionist barely looked at him. After a long wait, a young hiring manager named Jessica Whitman finally called him in. She glanced at his resume, her expression changing subtly. "Bit of a gap here, Mr. Gray," she said, tapping the paper. "Been out of work for a while?" Thomas smiled politely. "Had to take care of my mother when she fell ill. Full-time caregiving. She passed last year." Jessica didn't even nod. Instead, she leaned back, arms crossed. "That's tough. But honestly, we need people who are ready to work, not someone who's been out of the game for a while." Thomas paused. "I assure you I'm ready. I've worked in logistics, handled inventory, team coordination." Jessica cut him off. "We have applicants with more recent experience. Besides, we're looking for people who, well, fit in better with the team dynamics." That comment struck him. Fit in better? What did that mean? Before he could ask, she stood up and said, "Thanks for coming in. We'll be in touch." But he already knew the outcome. 2 days later, he received the email. "We regret to inform you that your application was not successful at this time. No feedback, no explanation, just rejection." And strangely enough, he'd overheard someone at the interview center mentioning that another applicant, a friend of the hiring manager, had already been selected for the role before interviews were even conducted. Now it made sense. Thomas didn't end his mission there. Instead of walking away, he returned the next day and applied for a different role, this time as a janitor through a temp agency the company frequently used. The pay was lower, but it gave him access to the building. From behind the scenes, broom in hand, he watched how things truly worked. He noticed something disturbing. Applicants who didn't look the part, whether older, less polished, or simply not in the hiring manager's social circle, were constantly turned away. But amid the unfairness, one person stood out. Her name was Elena Rivera, a single mother in her late 20s who had applied for a customer service role. She came early, dressed neatly, soft-spoken but confident. She had years of retail experience, glowing references, yet she was also rejected. Thomas had seen the way Elena's interview was conducted. Barely 10 minutes, rushed, no eye contact, and the same dismissive tone Jessica had used with him. But he also saw something else. Elena didn't leave bitter. Instead, she stayed behind in the waiting area to comfort another nervous applicant, offering words of encouragement with a smile. Something about her kindness struck him deeply. She wasn't just qualified, she had the very heart and spirit the company claimed to value. That evening, Thomas sat in his modest motel room, heart heavy. He thought about all the good people like Elena being shut out, all because someone at the gate was judging them unfairly. He knew now, this wasn't just one bad manager, it was a systemic flaw. The next morning, he made a call to his executive assistant and said just 4 words, "It's time, I'm ready." But what he had planned next would shake the company to its core. Because the following week, Jessica Whitman received a company-wide email. There would be a surprise executive visit, a full audit, and a meeting with a man named Thomas Grayson, the CEO she unknowingly turned away. But what Jessica didn't know was Thomas wasn't just here to talk. He was here to clean house. Sometimes the most powerful lessons don't come from board meetings. They come from the people you overlook. And for Jessica Whitman, that lesson was about to hit harder than she ever expected. A week after her casual dismissal of Tom Gray, Jessica straightened her blazer, trying to keep her nerves in check. The email from corporate had sent waves of panic through the branch. Unannounced executive visit, full operations audit, senior leadership will meet with key staff. No names had been mentioned, no timelines given, just vague warnings. But today, an official black car pulled up outside the branch. And the moment Jessica saw Thomas Grayson step out, escorted by corporate executives, her heart skipped a beat. She recognized him instantly. Same face, same eyes. But now there was no worn shirt or budget resume. Now he wore a tailored suit, walked with quiet authority, and everyone around him deferred like clockwork. Jessica's jaw clenched. That man she dismissed as unqualified and not the right fit, that was the CEO. In the meeting room, Jessica tried to maintain her composure as Thomas sat across from her. But he wasn't angry, not visibly. Instead, he was calm, cold, professional. "Ms. Whitman," he said, his voice steady, "let's talk about your hiring practices." She fumbled for words. "Mr. Grayson, if I had known," he raised a hand. "That's the point. You weren't supposed to know." He placed a copy of the rejection email in front of her. Then another folder, filled with documented observations, interview footage, and internal reports. "I watched how you treated applicants. I watched how resumes were filtered based on assumptions, not merit. I watched qualified individuals being dismissed, including one that stood out more than most. Elena Rivera." Jessica's face paled. "And I also learned," he continued, "that your hiring decisions were influenced by personal favoritism and superficial judgments, something this company does not and will not tolerate." Jessica was suspended on the spot. An internal HR review was initiated, and the rest of the hiring team was placed under evaluation. The branch manager, who had previously turned a blind eye, now faced disciplinary action for negligence. But Thomas wasn't finished. "This isn't about punishing one person," he said at the all-staff meeting that afternoon. "This is about fixing a culture that failed to live up to the values we claim to hold." His message was clear. Change was coming. That same week, Elena Rivera received a call she never expected. It was from the CEO's office. Confused and nervous, she arrived at the corporate headquarters the next day. She was ushered into a bright, open conference room where Thomas Grayson stood waiting with a warm smile. "Elena," he greeted, "I owe you an apology." Her brows furrowed. "Apology? For what?" "For the way you were treated during your interview. I witnessed it firsthand, and I've come to realize that people like you, those with kindness, resilience, and heart, are exactly who we need leading this company forward." She blinked, stunned. "Would you consider joining our leadership training program? You'll receive full pay, mentorship, and a direct path to a regional management role within the next year." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. I I don't know what to say." Thomas smiled. "Say yes, and help me rebuild this company into what it should be." She nodded, overwhelmed with gratitude. News of the CEO's undercover visit spread quickly throughout the company. It became more than just a corporate shakeup. It became a symbol of accountability. Hiring protocols were rewritten, anonymous audits were implemented, and diversity and empathy were finally woven into the very fabric of recruitment. But most importantly, people started to feel seen. Thomas received thousands of messages from employees across departments, thanking him for standing up for fairness, many of whom had quietly suffered through the same type of rejection for years. Weeks later, Thomas sat in his office, looking out over the city skyline. His assistant walked in and handed him a small envelope. It was a handwritten note from Elena. "Thank you for seeing what others didn't, not just in me, but in everyone who deserves a chance." Inside the envelope was a photo, Elena and her young son, both smiling wide. On the back, she'd written, "You didn't just change a company, you changed a life." Thomas leaned back in his chair, heart full. Sometimes leadership isn't about boardroom decisions or stock prices. Sometimes it's about listening, observing, and never forgetting the people who work in the shadows. It's easy to judge someone by what's on paper, but true character isn't found in a resume. It's found in how someone rises, how they care, and how they keep going, even when the world tells them no. And sometimes the most powerful change comes from the most unexpected places. Even a janitor, even an overlooked applicant, even an undercover CEO with a broom in his hand and a mission in his heart. Sometimes the most powerful lessons don't come from board meetings. They come from the people you overlook. And for Jessica Whitman, that lesson hit her harder than she ever expected. If you enjoy this, like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more stories.